So, Dave, here's my question for you. Let's talk a little bit about the quarterback position. Now, you've been on these mics for years talking about quarterback saturation and that there's enough human beings that now walk the planet Earth to do at least a bit of a decent job. Are you revisiting that a little bit now that you're kind of watching one of those human beings in Kenny Pickett? And I know he had an injury today, but even before he had the injury, he wasn't exactly lighting the world up, hasn't been lighting the world up the entire season. And so in this world of like alleged quarterback saturation, is the worst place to be the Kenny Pickett's of the world, the Mac Jones of the world? Are you better off? And you would never accept the trade. Like if you said Mac Jones for Trey Lance, like everybody like, I'd rather have Mac Jones. But would you? Would you actually rather have Mac Jones? Or is there some beauty in failing fast? Is there some beauty in realizing what you have isn't going to get you to the promised land rather than spending 4 or 5 years trying to figure it out? And even worse, having to give a second contract to a guy like Daniel Jones, who is okay, but is never going to be the exceptional reason that you get a ring. So are you caught in hell right now? Or are you one of those people who's like, no, I would obviously rather have somebody like Mac Jones or Kenny Pickett than Zach Wilson or another guy who's going into the ground?
So the evaluation is like guy who is, you see the talent. You watch Zach Wilson at the time that we're recording this. Sunday Night Football just wrapped up. Zach Wilson did not look out of place trying to shoot it out with Patrick Mahomes. In fact, he probably had a better game overall than Mahomes did, and that arm is live for Zach Wilson. But it feels like at this stage in his career, we've seen what he is, and he's too volatile, and he's never going to make it. It's interesting you bring it up with Pickett because, yeah, that's the conversation right now in Pittsburgh. Is sort of the idea of sunk costs, with him and with the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada. And it was kind of that evaluation 8 months ago that as the 2022 season wound down, there was just enough to make you think, okay, it's not just that this kid looks okay, Ken Pickett, but now if you remove the offensive coordinator, now you're delaying his progress because now he's got to learn a different playbook. And at what point do you pull the Band-Aid off if you feel like the wound is not healing underneath is what you're asking, right? I mean, that's like, well, are the Steelers in the market for a new QB this offseason? Basically, is it time to pull the Band-Aid off?
Well, should they, right? Like they only give out the one Lombardi, as you always point out, and that's correct. 31 teams are going to go home disappointed. But are you always going to be one of those teams? Is there any way to not be one of those teams if your quarterback is average and entering into a second contract where you feel like you have to pay him? So you have like two options, Dave. So like one is you have a rookie quarterback that is average or above average, but it gives you enough salary cap flexibility to build other killer components of your team that can carry you to the promised land as long as you get at least above average play. Or you have to have an exceptional quarterback, or at least somebody who's worthy of the contract you have to give them that can carry some of the places that you have to Band-Aid over because they're eating up your cap. So if you end up with just the average or below average guy that starts destroying your cap, how are you ever going to be the team that is having the parade at the end of the season?
The imperfect process of landing your QB, and blame assessment is all the rage for these teams that are 1-3 or even 2-2 in Pittsburgh's case, because people myself included, got over their skis about where this team was headed. So 2-2 is awfully unsatisfying when one of those losses just came down in Houston when they had most of their offensive line out and hammered the Steelers. Was embarrassing. I mean, the decision point is like the class. I guess ironically now, Jared Goff has served as the guy. Like, he is an illusion. Just because you drafted him first overall doesn't mean you have to pay him to be your franchise quarterback going forward once his rookie contract ends. And once you do that, it cuts into the rest of the roster enough. And then the Rams became what the Rams were after that Super Bowl run. Now he's landed clean and come through clean on the other side up in Detroit, it would appear, Jared Goff. But the point stands, I think you're trying to make there. The blame assessment, though, is like, here's the thing that, like, we're having this conversation, you and me, in this silo, and like, okay, maybe Kenny Pickett isn't the real deal. It's like, but landing the guy who is going to be the real deal to replace whoever you're dissatisfied with at QB is a hard trick, because Brock Purdy is on, I think everybody would agree, a month in, the best team right now is the San Francisco 49ers. And who's their quarterback? Is this guy. He's fine. I'm not knocking him, but the process by which he fell into their lap, and you talk about Trey Lance, think about that. The fluke that they're just going to get away with this, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, that they used the 3rd overall pick and they traded away assets to get the 3rd, to get Trey Lance, bust of a pick, an all-time boner of a move. And they're just fine because then they fell into Brock Purdy. They deserve no credit any more than the Patriots deserve credit for Tom Brady, except that then when you start getting to the blame game, you can try to put it all on the kid, but then the make good from Kyle Shanahan is he can make any quarterback look good. And, the Eagles, 18 months ago, there was nobody. You would never be able to convince me anybody in Eagles land was like, Jalen Hurts is the missing link for this team. Like, it's so you move heaven and earth to get a high 1st round pick to be able to bring that kid in. Those kids hit it about 50-60% of the time. And then the other guys like Russell Wilson, not now, but 15 years ago, and Brock Purdy and Tom Brady and all and Dak Prescott, those guys are late round draft picks. So I hear you. What the answer is, I don't have it, and neither do the scouts and personnel guys, or else they would be hitting at a much higher success rate when they go out into the draft and free agency.
Dave, 49ers is a really interesting point because the other person they were considering in that is actually Mac Jones. So let's say they took Mac Jones instead of Trey Lance.
Right.
Brock Purdy probably never sees the field because Mac Jones was just good enough to continue to play. And so you don't even know about Brock Purdy, though. And so that kind of like circles back to my point that you want to fail fast so you can evaluate other options and maybe you find the guy who is it.
But the pushback on that is that if you put Mac Jones in with Kyle Shanahan, what's to say that they wouldn't be exactly where they are now? Or better than they maybe were. I mean,
so
Mac
maybe
Jones,
the quarterback doesn't matter as much as the system. I mean, that is really interesting. But I think where the tipping point is right now is the Cardinals. So the Cardinals have Kyler Murray, but they're looking like they have the inside track to Caleb Williams. So should they lay down, make sure they get Caleb Williams, and then find some way off of Kyler Murray, or do they stick with Kyler and then let Caleb they can trade it obviously at that point. But what do you do in that situation?
I mean, the Cardinals provided the new template for pro football, and the 49ers applied it with Trey Lance and Brock Purdy, as it turns out, which is that Cliff Kingsbury now has moved on from pro football, if you haven't heard. But the thing that he did that really revolutionizes pro football is they take Josh Rosen the year before he gets there, 10th overall. Imagine you use you use a top 10 pick on a QB. Shame the devil. You can't turn around. That's just not the way you do things in pro. You got to give Josh Rosen a fair shake here. You got to give him a second, third year to give the kid some reps and get all that kind of stuff. And Kingsbury was like, I'm not taking the job if I can't draft Kyler Murray number 1 here. And they go from there. And for a year or two, it was a good story. Now, I don't know exactly. It does seem like whenever you want to purge a contract, and if he's a quarterback who's had success, you'll always find at least there's one taker who probably will roll the dice on him. So they probably can get out from under that contract. But I mean, yeah, it's vexing. You talk about Josh Dobbs. I know they're 1-3, but they're playing. They're in every game. It feels like they're putting a decent effort out there. And for what it matters to bring it back, 1st round draft pick Kenny Pickett is not playing as well as Josh Dobbs is playing in the desert right now. And so do you put that on the kid versus Dobbs, or do you put that to some degree on the coaching they're respectively getting? Everybody wants to be able to put a guy in the crosshairs. It's the head coach, it's the offensive coordinator, it's the QB, it's the guy, whatever. But, the fact of the matter is it's a collective effort to suck, basically. Yeah. I think that's the bottom line. And I think that so specific to the Cardinals, I bet you they would love to move on, because back to where you started 10 minutes ago, if you can reset your cap situation by having the most important position only making, single digit percentage of that cap, then you're in good shape, because obviously it allows you to pay for luxury items, pass catchers and shutdown corners and the rest of it. Whereas once you pay your guy $50-60 million to play QB, it's going to ding the rest of your roster's depth. And that guy better be the real deal. That's what you're getting at here. What I think is interesting, to throw one more scenario in here, Zach Wilson looked good on Sunday night. I can't imagine that Bob Saleh and company are now so enthused about Zach Wilson that they aren't worried about quarterback for future times. But
I know, but did he buy himself like 5 more weeks, 6 more weeks? Is the trade market of the Jets closed after tonight?
Yeah, I think so. And I'll tell you the other thing is that where it becomes interesting is, how long does the ineptitude, or the losses at least, continue with the Jets, because they have Aaron Rodgers now and they moved a lot to get him. But what if they're in a spot to get Caleb Williams or Drake May or Shedeur Sanders? Any of those guys might be there in the top 5. If you're bad enough that you're in the top 5 at some point, we're only at the quarter pole, not even with the 17th game now. Yeah. But you're going to start to see some percentage, and the new thing that happens in the NFL is the bottom feeders are going to start throwing away their player assets to contending teams. They'll start to trade those away for more draft picks. So look for that shake up on the way too, to see if the Jets are players. Obviously the Bears are heading in the inevitably horrid direction now. And are they going to move on from their guy? That's the other one. The Justin Fields. I mean, imagine 5 weeks ago, outside of this 3 podcast, was there any cynicism being expressed about where Justin Fields was headed? I was saying on that with Kevin Hench, like, what were people talking about with the Bears going to the playoffs? What were we talking about? That team is not going to be good. But I can't imagine that Eberflus is keeping his gig, but it's Justin Fields. Are they like bringing in a new head coach to try and fix this guy? Or given where they're going to finish, do they reboot all over again? Fascinating stuff.